Hi, welcome to Budget MTG Decks. All magic fun, all cards under $1. I'm David, and today we're going to be looking at a fun and effective commander deck you can build without breaking the bank. Now we only have one additional build rule next to the normal commander rules, and that is our cards have to be $1 or less, with the exception of the commander. And let's have a look at the commander we have today. We have a doozy of a commander that is Kozilek, the Great Distortion. For 8 and 2 colorless, we get a 12/12 legendary Eldrazi. Additionally, when you cast Kozilek, if you have fewer than 7 cards in hand, we're going to draw cards equal to the difference. So basically, we're going to fill our hand back up to 7 cards. It also has Menace, and we're going to discard a card with converted mana cost X, and that allows us to counter a spell with converted mana cost X. Okay, now this is the very first colorless commander deck that we've built so far, and it's got a very unique role. First of all, it's going to be giving us card draw. It's also going to be giving us protection through being able to counter spells. And it's also kind of a Voltron commander damage deck because it's a 12/12 with Menace, which means we can beat face, and with 2 hits, we can kill any opponent no matter how much life they have. The kind of cards we're going to need to make this deck work is, of course, the commander. We're going to need 23 ramp cards, an insane amount of ramp in this deck. Well, you'll see why that's necessary. We've got 15 utility cards, 12 removal cards, 11 card advantage cards, and 38 lands. Now, the ideal turn progression, it's not very interesting, but it's effective. Turn 1, ramp. Turn 2, ramp. Turn 3, ramp. Turn 4, some machine parts, which work well with the ramp. Turn 5, equipment, which Kozilek will love to equip. And turn 6, we're going to be trying to play Kozilek itself. Now, without further ado, let's have a look at the bread and butter of this deck, and that is the ramp. One thing to remember is that Kozilek is mana hungry, extremely mana hungry. So let's have a look at all the sources of mana that Kozilek brings along. And of course, they're all artifact based because this is actually a deck that also has an artifact sub-theme. Not unusual considering that it's colorless. The first of our ramp cards is Everflowing Chalice. For 0 mana, it's an artifact, and it's got multi-kicker 2, which means that for every time that we kick it, it's going to come in with a charge counter on it, and we can, once it's on the battlefield, tap it to add a colorless mana for each charge counter on it. So if it comes in just for 2 mana, we're going to be able to tap it for 1 colorless mana every turn. And of course, if we pay 4 mana, we're going to be able to get 2, etc. This is a very nice artifact early on in the game because you just pay 2 for it, but also late game, we can pump a lot of mana into it. It gives us a lot of value. Astral Cornucopia is very similar for 3 times X. It's an artifact which comes on the battlefield with X charge counted on it. So in this case, if we pay 3 mana, it would come in with 1 charge counter on it. For 6 mana, it would come in with 2 charge counters. And this one also taps for a mana, but this one gives us a mana of any color that we wish. Which it's not going to be very relevant. But next we move on to Wayfarer's Bauble. For 1 mana, it's an artifact. We pay 2 mana and sacrifice it, tap it. And then we're going to search our library for a basic land card, put it onto battlefield, tap, then shuffle our library. Now, there's not a lot of basic lands in this deck, but we do have wastes, which can be searched for with Wayfarer's Bauble. And of course, waste counts as a basic land. Pyramid of the Pantheon is next. For a single mana, it's an artifact. We can pay 2 mana and tap it to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. And we're going to put a brick counter on this card. Now, essentially you may say, okay, wait a second, why would we even want to do that? Because we pretty much only need colorless mana. But what we don't see it as a source of mana per se. What we're doing is we're putting mana into it to add bricks, and then once we have 3 or more brick counters on it, then we can tap it for 3 mana of any color. And that's, of course, going to be super nice to have an artifact that taps for 3 mana. Then we have Prismatic Lens for 2 mana. It's also artifact, taps for a colorless, but we can also pay a mana and tap it to give us a mana of any color. Also not going to be used very often, but it's just nice to have a 2 mana artifact that taps us for a colorless. Hedron Crawler, also 2 mana. This time it's a 0/1 creature, so it means it's a little bit more vulnerable to removal, but it does also tap for a colorless mana. Guardian Idol, 2 mana, artifact, also taps for a colorless. However, this artifact enters the battlefield tapped, which means it's a little bit worse. But on the plus side, we can pay 2 mana and turn it into a 2/2 creature until the end of turn for a nice little surprise attack, maybe punching a little bit through after a board wipe that people would not really be expecting. It's not used that much, but still just a mana rock. Mind Stone is also a mana rock for 2 mana, taps for a colorless, and we can pay a mana and tap it and sacrifice it to draw a card. This is actually really nice because later on in the game we may not want that much mana, and then we can always sack it to get that card draw. Usually, however, leave around because Kozilek is so mana hungry, more mana is never a problem. Palladium Mare helps us out with a little bit of mana. For 3 mana, it's a 2/2 creature. Once again, a little bit more vulnerable to removal, but this one taps for 2 colorless mana. It's important to remember that if it's just an artifact, so a mana rock which taps for mana, we can just tap it immediately as soon as we play it. But as Palladium Mare is a creature, all the creatures have summoning sickness, which means we cannot tap them to generate mana on the turn that they come in. Worn Power Stone for 3 mana is also an artifact, comes in tap, so we can't use it on the turn it comes in, but it taps for 2 mana. And next is Unstable Obelisk for 3 artifact, taps for a colorless mana, but it has a special ability. This is really nice actually. For 7 mana, we can tap it and sacrifice it to destroy target permanent. This is really versatile. This is a great card to have in this deck because it gives us mana, which Kozilek loves, but it's also a removal source which can hit anything we want on the table, and there's nothing to sniff at, especially considering that the budget sources of removal, especially target, well, also any kind of removal actually, are very limited. So this is a card that does double duty in this deck. Burnous Heart is also a card which cannot be underestimated. For 3 mana, it's a 2/2, which for 3 and sacrificing it, we can search our library for 2 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield tap. These will, of course, be wastes, but nothing to sniff at. And then we move on to Inspiring Statutory. For 3 mana, it is an artifact. And for, it states that non-artifact spells you cast have Improvise. Now, what does Improvise mean? It means you can tap your artifacts as if they be mana rocks, and then we can use those to pay for one mana as if they would be a mana rock, essentially. Remember, there's a lot of artifacts in this deck, which means we cannot use Inspiring Statutory to reduce the cost of those spells, but there's also a lot of Eldrazi and non-colored creatures which are not artifacts, and we can actually use those, use the artifacts to help pay for that stuff. And of course, remember that this card is also an artifact by itself, so it can tap itself to help pay for non-artifact spells. Foundry Inspector is next. For 3 mana, it's a 3/2. And it states that artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. This is a nice little reduction, nice little, just reduces the cost of any artifact that we're going to be playing. And as you know, we do have a lot of artifacts in this deck. Hedron Archive is next. For 4 mana, artifact, taps for 2 mana, 2 colorless mana, but we can also pay 2 mana, tap it, and sacrifice it to draw 2 cards. It's kind of like the Mind Stone, but then a little bit of a bigger version. Gives us twice as much in both mana and in cards. Warden of Geometries for 4 mana. It's a 2/3 Eldrazi drone. This is a good example of a colorless creature that is not an artifact. It has vigilance, but also taps us for a colorless mana. Sisay's Ring is next for 4 mana. Also an artifact, or in this case it's an artifact. Taps for 2 colorless mana pool, to our mana pool. Golem's Eye for 4 mana, artifact, taps for 2 colorless mana. Exactly the same. They're essentially exactly the same, these two. Then we move on to Kozilek's Channeler for 5 mana. It's a 4/full Eldrazi. Once again, this is not an artifact, and it taps for 2 colorless mana. Meteorite follows up that card for 5 mana. It also, well, this one taps for a mana of any color. But also when it enters the battlefield, we're going to deal 2 damage to target creature or player. It's nice to hit those little utility creatures that our opponents have, or mana dorks or something like that. Usually those very valuable non-combat creatures have low toughness. This is nice to have, add insult to injury. Not only are we getting a mana rock, but we're also crushing our opponent's useful creature with that. Blinkmoth Urn for 5 mana. It's an artifact, and it states that at the beginning of each player's pre-combat phase, so after their first main phase, if it's untapped, then that player adds colorless mana to their mana pool equal to the number of artifacts they control. Now, much as we've seen in, for example, Send Triplets, decks that really love to have a lot of artifacts. This is exactly the same. Kozilek is going to have probably even more artifacts and is going to be able to get great advantage of that, and actually has a way to tap it to make sure that our opponents do not get any value out of it. Dreamstone Hedron is next for a whopping 6 mana, but it does tap for 3 colorless mana, and we can also pay 3 mana, tap it, and sacrifice it to draw 3 cards. So this is exactly the same as the Hedron Archive, but then even a little bit more powerful. And then finally, we move on to the last of the ramp cards. That is Conduit of Ruin for 6 mana. It is a non-artifact this time. It is a creature, Eldrazi, 5/5. And when we cast it, so not when it enters the battlefield, but when we cast this card, we're going to search our library for a colorless creature card with converted mana cost 7 or greater. So this could be an artifact or not, as long as it's a creature, and as long as it's colorless, and as long as it's converted mana cost is 7 or greater. And we're going to shuffle our library and put that card on top of it. So we don't put it into our hand. It doesn't tutor it, but it tutors it to the top of the library, which is also pretty nice. And it also states that the first creature spell you cast each turn costs 2 mana less to cast. That's nice. It gives us every turn, as long as it's a creature, it gives us that 2 mana discount. That is a lot of ramp, but we're definitely going to need it. And let's have a look what we're going to put it into with the utility cards. We divided the utility cards into fatties. These are just going to be creatures that are going to be beating face. Equipment for Kozilek, or one of the big creatures. And the machine parts, which allows us to do fun little shenanigans with all our artifacts. So we start with the fatties. First one is a Lodestone Mirror for 4 mana. It's a 2/2 mirror with trample. So you may say, okay, a 2/2 with trample is not that interesting. But we can tap an untapped artifact we control to give it +1/+1 till the end of turn. This thing is going to get huge, and the beauty of it is that at the beginning of our turn, we can attack with it. It's just going to be a 2/2 with trample, and then people are going to be have to decide whether they want to block it, because if they block it, in response, we can of course tap our artifacts, even our mana rocks that we may otherwise be want to use for mana, but we may think, okay, it doesn't matter. Now we're just going to tap at instant speed and make our Lodestone Mirror huge, killing the creature that they use to block it and probably trampling over a little bit of extra damage. So it's almost always unblockable, and any extra artifacts that don't tap for anything useful, we just tap them and are able to make Lodestone Mirror do a little bit of extra damage. Mage Ring Responder is next for 7 mana. It's a 7/7 that doesn't untap during our untap step, but we have other ways of untapping it. And additionally, we could always pay 7 mana to untap it ourselves. Usually doesn't come to that. But what is the beauty of this creature is that not only, of course, if we don't attack with it, it's a 7/7 that's beautiful to block with, and we don't have to worry about the untapping clause, but if we do choose to attack with it, it will deal 7 damage to target creature defending player controls. It's very important to remember this deck does not have a lot of removal, so cards like this are really crucial and really help even out the playing field. Mirror Battlefield is next for also a whopping 7 mana. It's a 4/7, but enters the battlefield with 4 1/1 Mirror Artifact creature tokens. So actually for 7 mana, we get 5 creatures, one of which is a 4/7. And they're all artifacts, which means we can use them for useful stuff. Additionally, when this creature attacks, you may tap X untap mirror you control. And then this creature is going to get +X/+0 until the end of turn and deals X damage to target player or planeswalker it's attacking. So it's going to shoot damage even if it's blocked. And of course, we can use those extra mirror to make Mirror Battle Sphere an 8/7, which is of course nothing to sniff at in the attack. Bane of Bala Ged is next for 7 mana. It is a non-artifact Eldrazi 7/5 huge creature. Additionally, when this creature attacks, defending player is going to exile 2 permanents he or she controls. So it's even worse than sacrificing, because they're not going to be able to get that stuff back out of the graveyard. And this is, of course, an awesome ability. Colossus of Arcus is next for 8 mana. It is a 10/10 defender with indestructible. Additionally, if we pay 10 mana, we're going to be able to put 10 +1/+1 counters on it, turning it into a 20/20, removing the defender and giving it trample, which means that it is going to be a powerhouse that can plow through our opponents with ease and is, of course, extremely difficult to get rid of. This is also one of those reasons why this deck really loves to have a lot of mana, so we can get this out soon and we can get it monstrous even quicker. Metalwork Colossus is next for a whopping 11 mana. We got a 10/10 but we usually never end up paying that much because this thing costs X less to cast, where X is the total converted mana cost of non-creature artifacts you control. We saw already in the ramp section, we got tons. This thing is going to come in for free most of the time. Additionally, we could sacrifice 2 artifacts, which we don't need anymore, to return Metalwork Colossus from our graveyard to our hand and be able to cast it again. Now we move on to the equipment. We got some big stuff, but of course, Kozilek also wants to be safe and have some good stuff to smack with. And one of those things is Swiftfoot Boots for 2 mana. It's an equipment for 1. And equipped creature has hexproof and haste. It's nice, of course, to have the hexproof because people are going to want to target Kozilek to get rid of it, but also the haste, which means that if you're able to play Kozilek and have 1 extra mana left over, equip it immediately and attack with a 12/12 menace to people who are definitely not expecting it. Chariot of Victory is next for 3 mana. It's again an equipment, and the equip cost is 1. It's also very inexpensive. Usually we are going to be able to do this, put this on Kozilek on the turn that it comes in. And it's going to state that equipped creature has first strike, trample, and haste. Now, the haste once again means in turn it comes in, we're going to be able to attack with Kozilek, it's got 12/12 menace, but the fact that now that it also has trample means that it's going to be even more difficult to stop the damage, and the first strike means essentially nothing is going to be able to survive the attack against it. Then we'll move on to the last one, and that is Loxodon Warhammer for 3 mana. It's a little bit more expensive with an equip cost of 3, so we're not going to be able, most likely not going to be able to equip this onto Kozilek on the same turn it comes in, but it is loads of fun to put on it after because the equipped creature has +3/+0 and has trample and lifelink. Now swinging in with Kozilek sounds like a lot of fun, but I have also swung with a Colossus of Arcus, and that means that I was attacking with a 23/20 trample, lifelink, indestructible, and there's few things that are as much fun as that in the game of Magic, so I highly recommend that. Then we move on to the machine parts. The first one is Voltaic Key for a single mana. It's an artifact that allows us to pay a mana and tap it to untap target artifact. You can get so many fun shenanigans with this. Already just something which gives it so much value is an artifact, which for example taps for 3 mana. You know, we could tap that artifact for 3 mana. We use 1 of that mana to tap Voltaic Key and then untap the artifact, which taps for 3 mana, and tap it again, and that gives us a grand total of 5 mana, which is of course super, super sweet. And we can use it for all kinds of other shenanigans because it's instant speed. So people are also, maybe people attack into you, and then you can untap one of your creatures, your artifact creatures, and block when they were not expecting that. Voyager Staff is next for single mana, and it allows us to pay 2 mana and sacrifice it to remove target creature from the game, and then return that creature to play under its owner's control at the end of turn. Now this is nice against as kind of protection for Kozilek against target removal, but also works against board wipes. Cogwork Assembler is next for 3 mana. It's a 2/3, and it allows us to pay 7 mana. It's a lot, but this deck has tons of ways of generating lots of mana to create a token that's a copy of target artifact. The token gains haste, and we're going to exile at the beginning of the next end step. Needless to say, you have seen many artifacts that we'd probably want to make copies of, and it is expensive, but sometimes just being able to pump that extra mana into extra value things like this, getting multiple copies of awesome artifacts, is nothing to sniff at. It is attached to a creature because this is a 2/3 artifact creature, but needless to say, if it stays on the battlefield, it's going to do a lot of fun stuff. Shimmermare is the next card for 3 mana. It's a 2/2 with flash, which means you can put it in, comes in the battlefield as a surprise, and it states that artifact spells may also be cast as though they have flash. So unfortunately, we cannot use it to cast Kozilek. Kozilek's not an artifact, but loads of other stuff in this deck are artifacts, and that gives us a great advantage to surprise people with that stuff. Next is Trading Post for 4 mana. It is an artifact. What doesn't this artifact do? It is super versatile. For 1 mana, tapping it and discarding a card, we're going to gain 4 life. I find it you're probably not going to be using this too much, especially having something like Loxodon, the Loxodon Warhammer giving us lifelink is going to gain us much more life. But for 1 and tapping it and paying 1 life, you're going to create a 0/1 white goat creature token. This was quite useful to chump block. Sometimes people have very big but creatures that don't have trample, and then being able to do this every single turn to protect ourselves a little bit is quite nice. We can also pay a mana, tap it, and sacrifice a creature to return target artifact from our graveyard to our hand. The cool thing is that, of course, we can sacrifice an artifact creature to return an artifact creature, and then we can sacrifice that artifact creature to get another artifact creature back. So that is really nice to get some recursion there. And then finally, we can pay 1 mana and tap it and sacrifice an artifact to draw a card. Once again, we also have a lot of artifact creatures, and then we're going to be able to get a card for something that maybe is not so useful. Maybe, for example, a mirror token. We can get rid of that, and that will net us a card. Up next is Clock of Omens for 4 mana. It's an artifact. We can tap 2 untapped artifacts you control to untap target artifact. Now this is huge. This card is ridiculous in this deck. I get giddy when I have this card in my hand when I start the game, because you're going to get incredible value out of it. Remember, it also counts itself as an artifact, so you can already tap this one. You only really need 1 other artifact to be able to untap target artifact. And that is going to get really crazy out of control, especially when you have a full table with all your mana rocks, being able to get so many additional uses out of some really cool artifacts that are in this deck. So Clock of Omens is insane, absolutely insane. That is also the last of the machine parts and the last of the utility. Let's have a look at the removal. We divided the removal spells into targeted removal and board wipes. Now, the first of our targeted removal spells is Tarmod's Crypt for 0 mana. It's an artifact which we can tap and sacrifice to exile all cards from target player's graveyard. Now, sometimes somebody's playing graveyard shenanigans. This is a nice little artifact that we can use. Also comes in for free. And it's cool that, of course, we can still use the tap it for other shenanigans, like, for example, the Clock of Omens that we saw previously. So it still has use, even if nobody is playing graveyard shenanigans. Brittle Effigy is next for 1 mana, also artifact. We can pay 4 mana and tap it and exile it to exile target creature. Removal is at a premium in this deck, but having something which exiles is super strong. Unfortunately, this thing also exiles itself, so we cannot use it multiple times, but still totally worth it for 5 mana. Pacification Array for 1 mana is also an artifact. We can pay 2 mana and tap it to tap target artifact or creature. So it gives us a little bit of versatility. But the fact is, okay, it doesn't kill anything, it doesn't bounce anything, doesn't remove anything, but being able to shut something down from attacking us, which could kill us, is going to be huge in this deck. And the 2 mana is nothing to sniff at. Spatial Contortion is next for 1 and a colorless mana. Usually this is difficult to cast, but not in this deck. We have everything produces colorless mana, so I might as well just say for 2 mana. It's an instant, and target creature gets +3, -3 until the end of turn. This we're just going to be using as removal. We don't really need it to get the extra commander damage in. So anything that's 3 toughness or less, we're just going to be able to kill it. Warping Whale is next for 2 and a colorless. It's an instant. We can either exile target creature with power or toughness 1 or less. So it's nice to get rid of those utility creatures. Or, for example, Reese the Redeem. That's always nice to hit Reese the Redeem with something like this. We can also counter target sorcery spell. There's a lot of board wipes that might want to get rid of us, or maybe some sorcery speed things that might want to get rid of all of our artifacts. And it's nice to be able to counter that. And the last one is put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Zion creature token onto the battlefield, which we can sacrifice for our colorless mana. I wouldn't even bother using that one. So just save it for either removal of a utility creature or countering a sorcery that is going to put a monkey wrench in our plans. Titan's Presence is next for 3 mana. It's an instant. We're going to exile target creature if its power is less than or equal to the card that we reveal, and we have to reveal a colorless creature card from our hand when we cast this. So all the colorless creatures that we have are huge pretty much, so we'll almost always be able to exile whatever we want. Predator Flagship is next for 5 mana. It's a legendary artifact which allows us to pay 5 mana and tap it to destroy target creature with flying. That's already useful by itself. There's plenty of flyers that are super annoying that we might want to get rid of, but additionally, should there be something that we want to get rid of that doesn't already have flying, we can pay 2 mana to give target creature flying until the end of turn. Should nothing be bothering us, why not give Kozilek flying for 2 mana? Then we have a 12/12 menace flyer. That's good, right? Yeah. Scour from Existence is next for 7 mana. It's an instant, exile target permanent. Very expensive 7 mana, but then once again, we're playing colorless. Our options are so limited, especially in the budget section, that we have to be quite happy that for 7 mana, we can have an instant speed spell that also allows us to exile something, and it's actually a permanent, which means it's anything we want, which gives us extreme versatility. And next is Spine of Ish-Sah for 7 mana. Once again, also an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, we're going to destroy target permanent. Once again, okay, it doesn't exile, but it destroys, and which makes it a little bit less. But the fact that when this card is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, we're going to return it back to our hand. So if we have a way to sacrifice this artifact, we have a way to get rid of it, which we do in this deck. Bam, goes back to our hand. Next turn, play it again, start destroying stuff every single turn. That gets crazy real quick. And the last of the targeted spells is Gruesome Slaughter for 6 mana. It's a sorcery. Until the end of turn, colorless creatures we control gain tap. This creature deals damage equal to its power to target creature. Now, we're going to have tons of artifact creatures. These are all colorless. We play this. We tap them all to destroy all the stuff that is bothering us that our opponent controls. And the next turn, we can probably just attack with impunity. That is it for the targeted spells. Let's have a look at the board wipes. Very limited in colorless. So the first one is Niveral's Disc. For 4 mana, it's an artifact, comes in tap, so we can't use it right away. But the next turn, or any turn we want after that, for single mana and tapping it, we can destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. Of course, also will destroy itself because it's an artifact, but this one is recurable. So that is, of course, super sick, and super nice that it doesn't only hit creatures, but also artifacts and enchantments. Well, I'd rather have it didn't have hit artifacts, but the fact that it also hits enchantments is nice. And the last of the board wipes is Steelheld Kite. For 6 mana, it's a 5/5 flyer, which we can give Dragon Breathing for 2 mana, which means it's going to get +2/+0 to the end of turn. That's not really why it's in there. It's in there because when we've attacked an opponent and we've dealt damage to it, we can pay X mana to destroy each non-land permanent with exactly that converted mana cost. So that is, we're going to choose an opponent, bam, we're going to hit them. It could just be with the 5/5. We can also pump it with some of the fire breathing. But after that, we could choose, for example, okay, we're going to pump an additional 3 mana into it, and then all their converted mana costs 3 non-land permanents will be destroyed. And that is nasty. Remember that tokens have a converted mana cost of 0, which means that you can pay technically 0 mana and you will destroy all their tokens. That is brutal. All right, let's have a look at the card advantage cards next. Now, you may think to yourself, hey, doesn't Kozilek already have card draw attached to it? Yes, but sometimes casting Kozilek either early on in the game is not an option, or later on in the game when he's been removed too many times, also not an option. So you want to have some backups. You want to keep that card flow going. The first card is Key to the City. For 2 mana, it's an artifact. We can tap it to discard a card, and then up to 1 target creature can't be blocked this turn. This is actually extremely handy for Kozilek. We're trying to get in there with commander damage, and for a single card, we're going to be able to make sure that it is unblockable. So that is super nasty. Additionally, when this card, Key to the City becomes untapped, we can pay 2 mana, and if we do, we can draw a card. So it's going to replace itself. This one doesn't really give us card advantage per se. It does give us card filtering, and it also gives us a great way to end the game with Kozilek. Next card is Farsight Mask. For 5 mana, it's an artifact, and it says whenever a source an opponent deals combat damage to you, if Farsight Mask is untapped, you may draw a card. We're not going to tap this thing. Of course, we could with different ways, but we're not going to. We're just going to leave it like this. And then if our opponent attacks with 5 1/1 flyers, for example, we're going to be drawing 5 cards. So this card is a big dissuasion for a lot of people to be able to hit us, especially early on in the game when they know that it's not lethal stuff. So it keeps us safe for a long time. And if not, well, then we're drawing tons of cards. Tamiyo's Journal is next for 5 mana. It's a legendary artifact that each turn at the beginning of our upkeep is going to allow us to investigate, which means you get one of those cool clue token artifacts, which we can pay 2 mana and sacrifice to draw a card. It's nothing to sniff at. We just have lots and lots of artifacts just piling up turn after turn, which we can, of course, tap and use for other stuff, like, for example, Clock of Omens. But we can also tap this card and sacrifice 3 clues to search our library for any card and put it into our hand and shuffle our library. So whatever's the problem, this deck is going to have something as a solution for it, and then this Tamiyo's Journals are going to allow us to tutor for that. Very, very powerful. Endbringer is next for 5 and a colorless. It's a 5/5 Eldrazi. Once again, this is not a creature, so you're going to remember that. Sorry, not an artifact. And it also untaps during each player's untap step. So essentially, if we're playing with 4 players total, we're going to get 4 activations of this creature if we want to. One of the ways is to tap it to deal 1 damage to our creature or player. It's great for hitting those utility creatures. We can also pay a colorless, tap it to make sure that target creature can't attack or block this turn. So that's good to keep us safe. And, or of course, if there's only one good thing that people can block Kozilek with, or even if they have two things to block Kozilek with, you can just make sure one of them can't block, and then the menace will make sure that it'll get through because they can't block with one creature, so that already works. But this is actually the most relevant one. For 2 mana and tapping it, we can draw a card. So essentially, if we have enough mana, every turn, each of our opponent's turns as well, we're going to be able to pay 2 mana, tap it, and draw a card. That is why it's really in here. Staff of Nin is next for 6 mana. At the beginning of your upkeep, we're going to draw a card. That's what this artifact says, so that's nice, just for free. That's cool. And additionally, we can tap it to deal 1 damage to our creature or player. So just like with the Endbringer, it gives us a little bit that ability to hit those utility creatures, or maybe just 1/1 tokens, start killing those, which are not very handy to have around for us. Book of Raz is next for 6 mana. It's an artifact. We can pay 2 mana and 2 life to draw a card. So yeah, in the card before that, we got it for free every single turn. But with the benefit of this one, we are paying mana, we are paying life, but we can do it as many times as we want. As long as we've got mana, we can refill our hand right away, and that is nothing to sniff at. And then finally, we have Sandstone Oracle for 7 mana. This is a creature and an artifact, a 4/4 flyer, handy as well in a pinch to be able to deal damage to our opponents. But also when it enters the battlefield, we're going to choose an opponent. And if that player has more cards in hand than you do, draw cards equal to the difference. There's always somebody playing Commander who just has a ridiculous amount of cards in hand, who wants to draw their entire deck, or maybe even people who just always make sure that they're at 7. This is definitely a card that's going to be netting us a lot of cards, because it does kind of what Kozilek does for a little bit cheaper. That is it for the draw cards. Now we move on to the reanimation, because as we've seen, there's a lot of nice ways that we can sacrifice artifacts, and then of course when we want to get them back. One of those cards that allows us to do that is Mirror Retriever. For 2 mana, it's a 1/1 mirror that when it dies, we're going to return another target artifact card from our graveyard to our hand. Junk Diver, exactly the same for 1 mana extra, so for 3, but this time it's a 1/1 flyer. Scrap Trawler comes up next. For 3 mana, it's a 3/2 artifact creature, which states that whenever Scrap Trawler or another artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield. So this one doesn't just count itself, but also counts any other any other artifact. So not even artifact creature. When it's put it into the graveyard from the battlefield, we're going to return to our hand target artifact with converted mana cost less than the card that went into the graveyard. So that is huge. You get some really nice recursions. Of course, every time the converted mana cost is less, but it gets a lot of value. And then finally, the last of the reanimation spells. How can this card not be in here? It must be, because it's Artisan of Kozilek. Kozilek's got to come with its Artisan, and this is a 9 converted mana cost creature. It is a 10/9 Eldrazi, not artifact once again. And when we cast it, so now when it enters the battlefield, when we cast it, we're going to return target creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield for free. We don't have to pay anything. Bam, it goes right onto the battlefield. And it also has Annihilator 2, which means that when this creature attacks, defending player is going to sacrifice 2 permanents. So unlike the Bane of Balaged, which makes your opponent exile 2, this one only makes them sacrifice it, but still, needless to say, it is absolutely brutal. That is the last of the card advantage cards. Let's have a look at the lands. We divided the lands into 5 wastes and 33 non-basic lands. Now, it's 33 non-basic lands. I don't think we've ever had so many non-basic lands in any deck, and I think if I would go through all of them, read everything out, and explain every single card, we're going to be here for quite a while. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read out the cards, show them on the screen, and then you can pause them to read it later on at your own convenience, because essentially what each one of these lands does is not terribly crucial. The reason why there's so many non-basic lands in here is because we needed colorless sources, and only wastes supply that. But having more wastes does not actually add any more value, because even some of the worst non-basic lands that only give us colorless mana still has some kind of additional utility, some additional benefit, which is still better than a waste. The reason why we do have wastes in here is because there are some ways of getting non-basic lands out of our deck, and we do want to be able to do that as well. So that is why we have at least the 5 wastes in there. But each one of these lands is not terribly crucial. It just adds a little bit of versatility. It's fun to see when something lines up with a nice card. So I'm just going to go through them rapid fire. The first one is Mage Ring Network, Mishra's Factory, Nephalia Academy, Buried Ruin, Phyrexia's Core, Quicksand, Sanctum of Ugin, Garreach Sanitarium, Encroaching Wastes, Sequester's Stash, Spawning Bed, Glimmer Post, Blinkmoth Well, Ruins of Oran Reef, Throne of the High City, Blasted Landscape, Temple of the False God, of course, Gargoyle Castle, Radiant Fountain, Seagate Wreckage, Ursa's Factory, Haunted Fengraf, Crystal Vein, Foundry of the Consoles, Stalking Stones, Tomb of the Spirit Dragon, Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, obviously, Cradle of the Accursed, Dread Sanctuary, Desert, Cloud Post, Darksteel Citadel, Rogue's Passage. And that is it. That is the last ones. Wow, that would have taken forever. All right, let's have a look at the conclusion. In conclusion, this deck is a lot of fun. Now, we had never taken up the challenge before to build a colorless deck. We thought that it would be quite difficult, and to be honest, it was difficult to build this budget deck with only colorless sources and with our budget restriction. But finally, after many months of playtesting, we have finally come to something which I think we are all very happy with. Playing this deck has two elements which are extremely fun. You've got the big powerful creatures that come in. You know, you've got your Eldrazi, you've got your big artifact creatures that you can swing with and deal tons of damage. But conversely, we've also got tons of mana, and we've got those machine parts which allows us to tap, untap, get shenanigans, get stuff back from the graveyard. So it gives you a really cool dichotomy between those two elements of the deck, and it allows you to gives you a very different play experience every single time. Not to mention that, of course, Kozilek having something which people forget quite often, having that ability tacked on that is able to come in, it draws you a card. Okay, everybody expects that. People think, okay, whatever, the person's got a couple of extra cards. Starting that game up again, or continuing the game up with those 7 cards in hand, we have a wide variety of converted mana cost spells in this deck, and there's a good chance that when our opponent wants to play something that's really brutal, we will have something to counter that spell, and people are usually not expecting that. So when Kozilek's on the battlefield, we can protect Kozilek and the team with that ability. And additionally, of course, it's the 12/12 menace, and people have to do something about that, because once it starts swinging, it is really difficult to stop, and people die very fast. So all in all, it is a lot of fun to play, and it's got plenty of mana to be able to do all the shenanigans that you want. So you think that this would be super expensive? It is actually not. For 49, let's say for 50 bucks, you can get this deck. And I think that is actually a great deal for such a fun deck. Additionally, because you also this includes the cost of Kozilek and those 33 non-basic lands that you may think that would increase the price by a lot, but it's actually not too bad. I'd also like to remind you guys that if you do like these videos, you want to help us make more, you can head on over to patreon.com/budgetmtgdecks and donate as little as $1 a month to help out the cause. We'd really appreciate it. Also, subscribe to us here for the most powerful decks and advice everyone can afford. If you do as well, don't forget to hit the little bell so you can be part of the notification crew and get notified when a new video comes out. And if you want to talk to us, you want to get in contact with us, you want to see what non-budget upgrades are, just head on over and join us on social medias, which is Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Budget MTG Decks. We frequently post pictures of what we're doing and what we're play testing, so you can check all that good stuff out on the social medias. I guess that's it. Thanks for watching. I'm David, and this was Budget MTG Decks.